of final exam December 2019 on investment property. Okay, this question is about a transfer from IP to PPE or PPE to IP. Okay, on 1st January 2015, so let me draw the timeline. On 1st January 15, Tampana acquired a building for 15 million. The building was mainly used as main office, so this building is PPE. And depreciated on a straight line method on a yearly basis over 20 years. So this is the useful life, 20 years. So you notice in the previous question, it mentioned here useful life 20 years, okay, on that part, but we don't use it because it is a fair value model. Sometimes the information given, you will not use all of it, yeah, depend on the needs of the question. Okay, so the useful life is 20 years. On 1st January 18, due to unforeseen circumstances, Tampana Berhad had to relocate its main office to a new building in Had Datu. Okay, the building in Semporna was rented out. So originally this building is in Semporna. Now because he had to move to Had Datu, so this building is no longer used as the office. So he decided to rent it out. So when you rent it out, that means this is no longer an OOP. It is not owner's occupied property. It is not PPE anymore. It is an investment property. Okay. So on this date, there is a transfer, okay, from PPE to IP. Okay. Okay, the building was rented out at the market value of 150,000. So that is the rental income. I just jot down here so that if we need to use it, then we will use it. 150,000 per month. Just like I mentioned, if the question asks for SOPL for this date for 2018, then you may need to write down the rental income. Okay, at that date, the fair value of the building was 12 million. So the fair value is 12 million. Okay, so Tampana adopted fair value model to account for its IP. So starting on 1st January 18, okay, it will be considered as an IP. So you will use the fair value model. So fair value model, there is no depreciation on the building. Okay, and cost model for the PPE. So cost model, building using the cost model. But for PPE, whether you are using cost model or PPE, both model, you need to depreciate. You need to depreciate your PPE, regardless whether it is a cost model or revaluation model. It's just that if it is a revaluation model, you need to depreciate based on the revalued amount. I hope you still remember on that. Okay, so now we have all the information here. The question asks to advise on the accounting treatment of the transfer of the OOP. OOP is PPE lah, to IP on 1st January 18. Show the necessary working to support your answer. Okay, now, okay, this is what happened when there is a transfer. On the transfer date, they always give you the fair value because you need to compare. Because when there is a change from one asset to another asset, we need to identify what is the new value on that date. Okay, so on the transfer date, you always have to compare the fair value and the carrying value, just like the revaluation model or the fair value model. Okay, on the transfer date, you have to compare the fair value and the carrying value. So in this case, this is a transfer from PPE to IP. Okay, so what is the carrying value? Of course, you have to calculate from the back here. You have to identify the carrying value of the PPE. So the carrying value is cost less accumulated depreciation less accumulated impairment loss. So for this question, we only have cost and we have to calculate the accumulated depreciation. Okay. So accumulated depreciation is cost 15 million divided by the useful life 20 years times how many years you have used the PPE 15, 16, 17. So that is 3 years. So the accumulated depreciation is 2250. So carrying value here will be 15 million minus 2250. So you get 12,750. Okay, so now you see, compare the fair value and the carrying value. Your fair value is smaller than the carrying value, right? Therefore, now what should we put here when we compare fair value and carrying value? Because you have learned PPE and IP and the term used is different. Now look back. It is originally PPE. Therefore, we follow the terms used in PPE when we compare the fair value and carrying value, which is either surplus or deficit, right? So fair value is smaller, then it is a deficit. So the difference is 750,000. So deficit goes into SOPL. Okay, and then remember, just like what I teach you before, whenever you revalue your asset, there are two things that you need to do. You recognize the deficit and also you eliminate the accumulated depreciation. So the accumulated depreciation is this one, 2250. Okay, alright. So that's done for the theory part. Okay, so when you answer the question on the accounting treatment, okay, you have, these are the points that you have to say out in your answer. You have to tell about the transfer. You have to tell about the fair value here. Nanti I tunjuk in detail. And then you have to tell about comparing the fair value and carrying value and you get the deficit. And you have to talk about the elimination. Okay, okay. So now we can move on to answering the question. Okay, the question asks for the accounting treatment on the transfer. Now remember, every time you get a question like this, the way you answer, the structure is all similar. Okay, so the accounting treatment on the transfer. Okay, right. Sekejap ya. Okay, let's start with the first one. Okay, kat sini kita kena sebut ada transfer ya. So kita akan kata on 1st January 18. Sekejap. On 1st January 18, there was a transfer from PPE to IP. Okay, ni wajib cakap. Due to change of use. Ini juga wajib cakap. Due to change of use from OOP to rent. To rent it out. Okay, maksudnya originally it was an office and then later on you change it to sewakan, rent out. Okay. So next, we'll talk about the fair value here 12 million. So kita akan kata the fair value of RM 12 million is deemed to be the cost of the what? Of the investment property. Okay, so what you mentioned here, because on this date, now the building is now as an IP. Therefore, the fair value on this date is deemed to be the cost of the IP. Now, this depends on the question. If let's say the transfer is IP to PPE, so your answer would be the fair value is deemed to be the cost of the PPE. Okay, so you have to check what is the asset on this date. So if it has become an IP, therefore this is deemed cost of the IP. If it is IP transferred to PPE, that means this is a deemed cost of the PPE. Alright, so for this question, it is a deemed cost of the IP. Okay, so move on. The difference. Okay, another way of answering the difference of RM 750,000. Okay, the difference of RM 750,000. So you show, maybe you want to show the fair value. Tak nak lah, tak best. The difference between the fair value of RM 12 million and carrying value of RM 12.75 million, okay, is a deficit of RM 750,000. Okay, the difference between the fair value of 12 million and carrying value of 10% is a deficit of 750,000. Okay, so kalau nak sambung kat sini atau sambung saja kat bawah ni lebih bagus. So the deficit, the deficit is charged into SOPL. Wajib ni because there's a point there, there's a tick there. Okay, lepas tu next, the accumulated depreciation on the PPE, the accumulated depreciation on the PPE is eliminated. Accumulated depreciation of the PPE of RM 2250 2250 is eliminated, is to be eliminated. Okay, now the carrying value here 12.75 million. Of course, this is not magic because you calculate that from this. So make sure you show this working somewhere in your answer. If you don't have the working and the answer that you give here is wrong, you immediately will get 0. But if you show this, okay, or if you show this correct figure but I couldn't find your working, you still get full mark. But the problem is always when the figure is not correct, so I need to check how you get the calculation. So if you don't show the working, so you get 0. So make sure, so either you show your working here next to 12.75, you show 50 million minus ni semua lah, everything here, you show in here, it will be good. Or if you have shown your working somewhere in your answer, then I should be able to see it, right? You don't want to lose marks if you don't provide the workings. Okay, I think that is done for the accounting treatment on the transfer. So basically, when you answer question on the transfer, this is just a standard, I would say standard sentence. Okay, follow the same way of answering the question. There was a transfer due to change of use. The fair value is deemed to be the cost of whatever that is the asset at that date, and then the difference is what? Is it a deficit? Okay, now when I talk about here, okay, let me explain you further. Let me explain to you further about the transfer. Now let's say now the transfer is from PPE to IP. Okay, just like this question. Okay, so originally it is PPE, and then you transfer it become IP. Okay, so you have learned PPE is either cost model or revaluation model. Okay, so on the date of transfer, okay, this is a transfer date, you will be given with the fair value, and always at all time you need to compare with the carrying value, and you will get the difference. So the difference is either you write it down as gain or deficit or surplus depending. Okay, so the difference would be referring to what is the original asset. So if the original asset is PPE, then the difference would be surplus or deficit. Okay, you know that surplus is when the fair value is more than the carrying value. Deficit is when the fair value is lesser than the carrying value. So the difference would be this either one, because originally it is PPE. Regardless whether it is using cost model or revaluation model, we don't mind about that because this is on about transfer. Okay, but previously when you did PPE, if it is a cost model, you ignore the fair value, right? But for transfer cases, when you compare, you apply the same method like you do for the revaluation. Okay, so just like this question kan, previously this one, it is a cost model. So on the transfer date, you must always compare the fair value and carrying value, and the difference will be referring to what is the original. So this is PPE, therefore it is surplus or deficit. Or it could be transfer from IP to PPE. This can happen. So originally it is IP, so you transfer it to become a PPE. So IP is either cost model you do or fair value model. And on the transfer date, okay, on the transfer date, you will be given with the fair value, and of course you need to compare with the carrying value. So the carrying value will be from here lah. So cost model, you need to depreciate your IP. Okay, for fair value model, you don't depreciate, so you just carry whatever initial cost here up to here. Okay, so the difference. So the difference must be what? It must be the term that you use for IP, which is it's either gain or loss on fair value. Okay. So if gain, if fair value is more than the carrying value, and it is loss if the fair value is smaller than the carrying value. So I hope you understand, because sometimes the student they make mistake on this part. Okay, originally this is PPE, therefore when you do the difference, it will be surplus or deficit. Okay, and then if it is originally as an IP, therefore it should be gain or loss. Okay, because this is the term that you learn when you did on IP. Okay, so when we talk about journal entry, okay, so during the transfer, firstly you recognize, okay, contoh untuk ni journal entry. Okay, for the transfer, you will recognize the IP kan. Okay, sekejap because just now you mentioned, we mentioned that the fair value is deemed to be the cost of the IP. So, of course lah kita akan debitkan IP. And we will credit the PPE. PPE. Okay, so kalau contoh tadi 12 million, so it will be 12 million here, and credit PPE 12 million. This is saya tulis dia sebagai transfer lah. Transfer PPE to IP. This is the journal entry. Okay, and then we have to perform journal entry for this part when you compare the fair value and carrying value. So you get deficit, right? So deficit, okay, so you get deficit. Saya guna contoh yang sebelum tu. So you need to debit the SOPL. Okay, for the deficit. Okay, deficit tadi ialah 750,000. And at that time, when you compare, it was on PPE kan? So, we credit the PPE. 750,000. When you eliminate the accumulated depreciation, so you will debit accumulated depreciation and you credit the building kan, the PPE, the building. This is also PPE building. Okay, so the accumulated depreciation that you eliminate just now ialah apa? 2250. Okay, 2250. Okay, so that is the journal entry. Now, if we check back, okay, now we check back. Originally, the building is 15 million. The initial cost is 15 million. The PPE, saya letak sini PPE. The initial cost is 15 million. And then, you less with the accumulated depreciation. So you get kat sini 2250. So you less, you get a carrying value of 12,750. Correct? And then you get a deficit. So you less lagi, deficit 750,000. Because you credit your deficit kan. So here is 12 million. Okay. That's why you get 12 million ni dah equivalent dengan fair value. See? So now originally this is PPE, now it becomes an IP. So this is how we show the journal entry, the first journal entry, debit, IP, credit, PPE. And of course, ni semua kena tunjuk lah. This is deficit. Okay. If you look at the PPE itself, the building. Okay, sekejap saya tengok. Contoh saya tunjuk kat sini. Kalau kiraan dia on the building sahaja. Okay, originally the initial cost is 15 million. And then, okay, saya kreditkan this one, 750,000. So, I less 750,000 for the deficit. And then, saya less lagi 2250 for the elimination. Okay. So, this one, berapa akan dapat? 15 minus 750 minus 2250. So, you akan dapat juga 12 million kan? So, this is the fair value. So if you were to draw this in the movement kan, so this is on the cost part. Okay, yang tadi ni pun sama juga. After you adjust for the deficit, mana tadi? This one kan. When you adjust for the deficit, you will get equivalent to the fair value of 12 million. This one, if we look at the cost part only, okay, you get the 12 million. So basically that's the way. So same goes to if it is a transfer from IP to PPE. Firstly, you recognize the transfer. Okay, recognize the transfer from IP to PPE. So you will debit your PPE because recognize as PPE, and you will credit IP. Next step, okay, you identify this gain or loss. Okay, so if you get gain, it is a revenue kan? Of course, you will credit your SOPL. And you will debit your apa tadi? PPE lah. Salah. Originally dia adalah IP kan? Debit IP. Okay. If you get a loss on fair value, so definitely you will debit SOPL and you will credit your IP. Okay. Alright, the third part, do we have the eliminate accumulated depreciation for the IP? Only if the IP is measured at cost. Kalau it is measured at fair value, there is no depreciation kan? So if the IP is measured at cost, then you will have accumulated depreciation, then you need to eliminate. If originally IP is fair value, then no depreciation, means you don't have this step. Okay, so that is all. Thank you.